Sir Keir Starmer has called Britain's new deal with the European Union a win-win for both sides after hosting the first UK-EU summit since Brexit. It's a wide-ranging agreement, and here are some of the new measures. A deal to cut red tape and align standards with the EU to allow more farming and food exports. In return, the EU has been given an extension of its existing fishing quotas, with boats having access to British waters until 2038. There are plans to allow young people to travel, study and work freely between the EU and Britain again. The details and numbers are still to be agreed. And British travellers will be able to use electronic passport e-gates in the EU to reduce queuing time, although this needs to be implemented by individual member states. The Conservatives and Reform UK have both accused the government of surrendering to Brussels. We'll look at the economic impact and also at what it means for the fishing industry. But first, Chris Mason looks at the politics of the deal.
Cameras, arches, chandeliers. So often the trio of moments of theatrical diplomacy.
Good morning, have you driven a hard bargain?
Add shouting reporters to the mix and you have a summit. This the first ever between the United Kingdom and the European Union.
This is the reset moment the Prime Minister's long talked about. Let's now see what the detail amounts to.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to London. The sun is just coming out.
The sun had long set late last night when the negotiators, fuelled by takeaways, finished talking. The deal was given final approval first thing. Flanked by two of the EU's most senior figures, the Prime Minister then joined us to sell his deal.
Ladies and gentlemen, Britain is back on the world stage, working with our partners, doing deals that will grow our economy and putting more money in the pockets of working people. This deal is a win-win. It gives us unprecedented access to the EU market, the best of any country outside of the EU or EFTA, all while sticking to the red lines in our manifesto about not rejoining the single market, the customs union, and no return to freedom of movement.
The European Union, deeply bruised by Brexit, sees this as normalising a new relationship between the UK and the EU.
We're turning a page. We're opening a new chapter in our unique relationship. This is the story of historical and natural partners standing side by side on the global stage, facing most of the same challenges, pursuing the same objectives, like-minded, sharing the same values.
Today was never going to be about massive change. Ministers have long promised they wouldn't do that. There is a defence and security pact with the prospect of British arms firms being able to sell their products to EU countries more easily. There's also a deal to cut the queues you may have stood in at European airports, but getting rid of them will now be down to individual countries. The UK's controversially agreed to give the EU access to UK fishing waters for 12 years. In exchange, there is, in the jargon, an SPS deal, which is about making it easier to sell food and agricultural products into the EU.
This is a complete sellout. I am completely shocked that Keir Starmer has agreed to all of this, concession after concession. What he wants to do is just be able to say we're closer to the EU without working in the national interest.
We Liberal Democrats welcome the agreement today because we think it is a positive first step towards undoing the damage caused by the Conservatives' botched Brexit deal. But we are clear that today's agreement should be a first step and a stepping stone, not the final step.
A 12-year deal on fishing is completely unacceptable. Likewise, sort of becoming a rule taker of new rules and regulations from Brussels, being subject to the European Court of Justice again. This is unacceptable.
Strong views on Brexit are still not far away then, and neither are those difficult trade-offs between making trade easier and where power lies: sovereignty.
To be clear, Prime Minister, isn't the truth that you've sold out the fishermen for what you see as the greater good?
The driving principles of the comprehensive set of arrangements we've agreed today is about bills, it's about jobs, and it's about borders. They're the driving principles. And the SPS zone cuts away a huge amount of red tape for businesses and the way that we trade. It is incredibly important for fish because over 70% of our seafood goes into the European market.
A question to the European Union, to President von der Leyen. This deal involves the UK becoming an EU rule taker, which some people here really don't like. Are you pleased to have the UK back within the EU's orbit?
Of course, whenever we have an agreement among us, we define together what the rules are, how we will act together on a specific topic. So it shows the sovereignty of a country by being able to take agreements like this one here today.
Next for the three leaders, a wander about on HMS Sutherland, a Royal Navy ship, to illustrate what they see as the importance of closer defence ties. Make sure your hair's straight for the final photo op before the talking continues. Much of what's been agreed still lacks detail and timeframes. There are more negotiations to come. Chris Mason, BBC News in central London.
So will the UK be economically better off with this deal? Faisal Islam is here to tell us more. Faisal.
Thanks, Rita. The broad answer is yes, moderately, according to almost all business groups, supermarkets that trade our food and the economic modelling. Now, trade deals in general offer a modest bump up, fractions of a % a year of the overall economy over a decade and a half. The recent India deal, for example, would boost the economy by £5 billion a year eventually. The CPTPP deal, which you see in orange there, negotiated by the previous government, that's £2 billion-ish. The US deal to alleviate tariffs, well, that was worth hundreds of millions. And a deal for the 6 Gulf nations in yellow there is also imminent. Now, today's deal with the EU is worth £9 billion a year by 2040, but this only really flows from that free-flowing food and farm exports and electricity trading improvements with the EU. We just trade so much with Europe, this bigger boost comes from just those 2 areas.
The big rowback of post-Brexit red tape is the eradication of export health certificates, veterinary checks and border checks for food and farm trade. These were costly new barriers to trade, especially damaging to perishable goods. 4 years ago, one exporter showed the reams of forms, the need for a vet to stamp for safety. Others, cheesemakers and popcorn makers, showed us how they had ceased trading, particularly directly with individual buyers in the EU. Some are now changing their plans after today.
This is a great result for us and for every other food business in the UK right now. We've really struggled since Brexit. We haven't been able to ship online orders to our internet customers from all over Europe who want to buy our popcorn.
So it's really positive, it's good. It's just a shame that it's taken so long. And, maybe I wouldn't have actually sold that my business as I had to at the time.
So this turns the clock back towards friction-free trade for often highly perishable food that the UK had in the EU single market before Brexit. And in the business community, they see similar deals in manufacturing, engineering and services as the future of this new strategic partnership.
There's definitely more that we are looking for that can come. So the VAT requirements for small businesses, we have a worse situation than Norway, for example, currently, being part of the PEM, getting mutual recognition for our qualifications, professional qualifications. So there's more good stuff to come.
Now, there are trade-offs here with fishing, as we've been hearing, and another quid pro quo, even now, the UK following EU rules and standards in food and farm trading. This was a red line for the previous government, not for this one. A deal was in the election manifesto. But when Brexit was being negotiated, the then government said a deal like this with Europe would rule out global Britain's trade deals around the world. That is clearly no longer the case, as you can see. It's a big change and leaves the UK with some of the closest deals offered by a number of important trading partners. Rita.
Faisal, thank you. Well, today's agreement gives EU fishing boats continued access to UK waters until 2038. The government insists that the industry and the country will benefit because, as Faisal was explaining, in return there'll be reduced checks on food exports to the EU. But opponents claim that fishing has been sacrificed in order to secure a deal. James Cook reports now from Fraserburgh.
The glory days of Scotland's fishing industry are long gone. The hustle and bustle has died away. But 4,000 people still make their living catching fish off this nation's shores, and some of them are worried.
100 years, I would say, my family's been involved in fishing, and it's just, if we lost the fishing, there'd be a lot of families in the northeast Scotland and the islands would be lost, wouldn't know what to do. We just reinvested, got a new boat 2 years ago with Brexit, thinking we turned a corner. Now the future's uncertain now. We could be looking just, this worst case scenario, this could devastate the fishing industry.
And the trade body, which represents 450 fishing vessels and their crews, says Sir Keir Starmer is the one who's sold them out.
It looks as though there has been a total capitulation from the UK Prime Minister to all the demands of the EU.
How would you characterise how people are feeling in the fishing industry?
The vast majority of our fishermen will be devastated to see that the industry has been used yet again as a bargaining chip for other things that the UK wants to secure.
The identity of places such as Fraserburgh is closely tied up with fishing, but the cold, hard economic truth is that the industry is a shadow of what it used to be, and it appears that other sectors, bigger sectors of the economy, have been prioritised in this deal. Those sectors include salmon. It's Britain's single biggest food export, and producers say they've lost £3 million a year since Brexit because of delays and red tape. They sound delighted with this deal.
The most significant impacts for us in exporting salmon to Europe, which is our most important market in the world, is that it will reduce cost, it will reduce bureaucracy, and it will also make sure that the product arrives quicker with our consumers all across Europe. That's really important.
Downing Street says the deal it has stitched together with the European Union will benefit Scotland overall, but the SNP says the country would be better off inside the EU.
When we were in the European Union, we didn't have the barriers to trade, which is key to the seafood industry, which has now been unpicked to an extent in this new deal. But equally, they were able to negotiate on a regular basis, and that is what we think should happen.
But here in northeast Scotland, there are plenty of fishermen who oppose both this deal and EU membership, which may explain why support for Reform UK is on the rise here. James Cook, BBC News, Fraserburgh.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the New Deal also includes plans to allow young people to travel, study and work freely within the EU again, under a scheme the government says would be capped and time limited. But the exact details are still to be negotiated. Danny Savage has been asking people in Leeds and in Wakefield what they make of the plans.
Leeds University, a place where traditionally many students do courses that offer time working in the EU. But post-Brexit, that became more challenging, as language student Lucy explained to me.
There are so many seminars and workshops you go to about getting a visa, and especially for Spain. Oh, I feel so bad for my friends who are going there on my year abroad because there's just so much admin to fill out. They're constantly going to offices and trying to get their identity card, get their visa sorted, and it takes out the fun of it, definitely.
I think it's a really, really good move.
Sasha is a languages professor at the university.
Some people will be watching this thinking, oh, I'm not sure about this. More foreign workers, young people coming into this country, not necessarily to go to university. What would you say?
Really boosts our economy that students are coming here. It's a time-limited scheme, so these people are not necessarily here to stay.
Fabio runs a nearby restaurant and would love to welcome back young EU workers, but it won't be a return to a pre-Brexit setup.
Do you think there's the possibility of a mix between young British workers and people coming in from Europe who want to make a career of it?
I would genuinely say so. I can imagine myself being really pleased and happy to work with a mix.
We've had a referendum to leave, and now we're aligning ourselves back with Europe and giving away things that we should be having.
Down the road in Brexit supporting Wakefield, a future youth mobility scheme sparked some spirited debate amongst John, Dave, Jennifer and Moira.
But if your grandchildren were good at Spanish or French,
I would love them to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that families in Europe would love their children to be able to do that, and we shouldn't be restricting them because of political ideas.
If more young people voted to remain, young people should be given that opportunity to have at least 3 years of that freedom.
Oh yeah. Young people aren't 35 years old, are they? You know, it's up to 35 years old. They're not young. Why come into this country?
The Prime Minister says today will move us on from Brexit rows. Times are changing again. Danny Savage, BBC News, West Yorkshire.
Chris Mason is with me for a final word. We heard a mixture of views there, Chris. So the Prime Minister's hailing this deal, but it's a risky moment for him.
It is, and I think those views kind of illustrate that, really. It reopens all of those arguments that we had all those years ago. Now, the government's imposed quite a set of limitations on its room for manoeuvre, guardrails as it sees it, around not unpicking the fundamentals of Brexit. But the challenge of that is that the risk is that the custodians of the original Brexit deal say it's a dilution of Brexit. The forever convinced that Brexit was a disaster group of people will say that this is half-hearted. Now, the Prime Minister's language today, you picked up on this in the headlines a few minutes ago, is that he hopes most people are beyond that. Time to move on. That sense that making Brexit work better might be a majority opinion. Now, the Prime Minister's been out and about selling his deal tonight, talking to business leaders. Folk in government seem pretty chipper with how it's gone down in the round. Two final thoughts. There's loads of detail in this and further negotiations, and where they get to will be key to how this overall package of measures feels. And this summit is going to become an annual event. So our uneasy relationship with our nearest neighbours, that was uneasy as a member and is uneasy as a non-member, will always be there. But this government's direction of travel, within those self-imposed guardrails, is to head to a closer relationship, and we could yet see more of that.
OK, thank you. Chris Mason there.